just reflecting on that lesson, what do you feel went well?
I feel like the kids were pretty engaged in the text, and I thought they were enjoying it, and it was really a good connection to Latin American culture, which I know that they can, it's nice for them to make a connection like that so that they feel really like they're important and that their culture really matters a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. They did definitely seem engaged by the story, and it's one of a number of books we've read on Latin American culture. What did you feel were some challenges during the lesson?
I feel like moral of the story is just a very hard concept for them, because it's often very specific to the text,
Yeah.
and then it sort of can be wishy-washy at times, the moral of the story, and it also just requires like a lot of like background knowledge and like really being in the text and really engaged in the lesson.
Mm-hmm.
So moral of the story is just, it's difficult.
It is definitely one of the more difficult skills
for sure.
during the year. So I guess it's to start, because that was kind of where I wanted to focus into, was on the moral and how you taught that. What did you identify as the moral of this story?
Well, I identified the fact that it's the lesson that a character in the story learns, and the fact that to help identify the moral, you want to take into account the character's feelings, how they change from the beginning to the end of the story, and things like that.
Mm-hmm. And you did a nice job of introducing that in the anchor chart at the beginning of the lesson. And that kind of previewed the skills they would need throughout the lesson to identify the moral. Specifically about this book, what did you feel like was the moral that this book was focused on?
In Delia's Wondrous Hair, it was basically like kind of almost like do your own thing, and you know, because everyone was telling me, oh, you need to wash your hair, you need to cut your hair off, and she's like, no way. And then in the end, all of a sudden, beautiful butterflies are coming out of her hair, and I think it just teaches the kids that you know, your individuality is important, and not to let others influence that too much.
Good, yeah, exactly. So that's pretty much what I identified as well. I guess if I was to put it really crisply, it would be something like believe in your own ideas, or believe in yourself and what you think, or something along those lines. I think sometimes teachers jump to that spot where they're teaching the moral and they haven't like really clearly identified it themselves. So it's really important to do that first. Good. So and then just jumping ahead a little bit, so you gave some exit tickets at the end of the story where kids were looking at the morals of another passage after you had read this book. So it wasn't focused on this book, but it was on another passage. How did they do on those? And, well, first of all, how did they do on those?
They didn't do so well on the exit ticket. The students who I expected to do really well did well, but I think that what was good about the exit ticket was that it was just a short passage, so they were able to just focus right in on that and not get so overwhelmed with an entire story, which can be sort of hard. But they kept on saying to not be a bully, because I think that they're like, that's driven in their heads so much. And
Why do you think that is?
I think because we talk about it so much, and like we give these types of examples to our friends in like social stories and stuff, but just friends had a lot of trouble trying to figure out that you need to defend your friend, was basically like stick up for your friends instead of like just letting things go, and how important that is, and people kind of just hyper focused on the whole aspect that it was just about a kid being a bully instead of standing up to your friends. So once again, sort of that like not 100% clear type of moral, because you know they did also learn it's not good to be a bully. It hurts people. It hurts people, But at the same time, really the big takeaway was that it was supposed to be, stick up for yourself and your friends.
Okay. And then how did they do in terms of how did you feel they did in terms of identifying the moral of this story?
I felt like it was a lot of kids were there, but there were still a lot of kids who were still not understanding the moral of the story.
Okay. All right. So is there anything, looking back at the lesson, that you would have changed to help them do better on that final turn and talk where they were looking at the moral of this story?
I think I would have modeled more examples of, a quick little story and then identifying the moral. I think I would have spent a little bit more time on that. And maybe before the final turn and talk, I would do that again. I know I kept on referring back to like The Boy Who Cried Wolf because that's just like the easiest one for them to understand. And I think that might have been easier for them if I had referenced that more. And maybe reference the anchor chart more too.
Okay, so are you saying in like the preview to this story, like giving more examples there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then right before the final turn and talk too, just giving more examples of pulling out the moral and also like the questions you can ask yourself to help you figure out the moral of the story. How did the character change? What were the character's feelings? That kind of thing like that.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely some more examples at the front end just for them to practice like figuring out morals would probably make sense. So you had the one example that you gave, but I think they're also like putting a little more work on them to figure it out, just so they're like practicing figuring morals, practicing, because it's not an easy skill as you've identified.
And I think they understand the moral of the story is the lesson they learn. They understand that. The hard part is for them to extract the moral from the text. They get it that it's like a lesson learned. Most of them get it. That's the lesson that the character learns is just that skill of analyzing the text and being able to produce what the moral of the story is from it.
Right, okay. So now what did you feel like was challenging in this book in particular for them to identify this moral or lesson?
It's a book. I taught it last week, so it's like, trying to think. What kind of complicated things?
Well, you said a lot of them had difficulties with identifying the moral here. You identified that the moral was something along the lines of Dahlia believing in her own ideas.
I think that part of what I thought was a little bit difficult was that like there was so much lead up and then just all of a sudden, bam, there's a moral. I didn't feel like there was enough hints throughout the big chunk of the text for the kids to use to help identify the moral of the story. So I think that was a little bit of I wouldn't call it like a distraction, but it was like a long story that like builds and builds and builds, which is awesome as a story, but I think that made it a little bit hard for them to identify the moral.
Okay, so like the clues for figuring it out, there weren't enough examples going along. Yeah, I kind of agree with you on that, like looking through the story myself, it's true there maybe aren't as many clues as we'd hope.
Because going into the story, you never would guess that that's how it was going to end if you had never heard the story. Her hair is going to turn into like a butterfly nest. So I think that like if the issue with the text is just the fact that there's not enough of those clues throughout the text, I think.
So stipulating that point for a minute, but just in terms of like dealing with the book as it is there anything you feel like you could have done to make it easier for the kids to figure out the moral based on your reading of it?
I think I would probably ask more of those questions about determining the moral of the story, like how do you think the character's feeling right now? Like, and a lot of those inferential type questions help with identifying the moral, and I think that I could have been more targeted with my questions throughout the reading to help kind of plant the seed for the moral. In hindsight, I think I could have been more effective with my CFUs and turn and talks and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking as well, like throughout the book. So you used a few CFUs to ask factual questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Given the aim of the lesson was more around figuring out the moral, mm-hmm. and given that it's such a difficult skill for them, mm-hmm. especially with this book, I think that focusing all or almost all of your CFUs directly to that mm-hmm. aim, and also like really highlighting, really teaching them mm-hmm. How to find that moral. So, mm-hmm. for instance, I think sometimes we think of this too quickly as like the assessment mm-hmm. of whether they can figure out the moral, mm-hmm. but really this read aloud is like to teach them how to do that, mm-hmm. and then later we're like, yeah. we have plenty of opportunities to assess whether mm-hmm. they can do it.
I needed to balance inferential and factual questioning better.
Yeah, that was my thought as well. So like I picked out a few places where you might really emphasize with mm-hmm. the students that she's like believing in her own ideas. Mm-hmm. So like yeah. for instance, she runs past Senor Dominiquez, and the woman says like, "You're bringing the forest with her." Yeah. At that point, like she, well, do you remember? Like, what does she do?
Was she the one who wanted to cut the hair off?
No, that comes next. But like, yeah. same idea. Yeah. So the next woman has the machete, and she's gonna like, what a tall, filthy mess. Mm-hmm. Like that's where you could really emphasize to the kids, like, oh my gosh, like here's a woman like older than mm-hmm. than she is, like saying like she should cut her hair, and mm-hmm. what does Dahlia do?
Yeah,
you know, she
plant that seed.
Yeah, she like really believes in her own ideas there. Mm-hmm. And then there's a third example. So like agreed, like ideally maybe a book would have like even more examples that lead up to the yeah. lesson learned or the moral. Mm-hmm. But I did find 3. So the third is like her mom, who's been supportive of her mm-hmm. throughout the story, even suggests like to use the moonflower shampoo. Mm-hmm. And again, like, so this is where you'd really emphasize to the kids, like, Dahlia believes
yeah.
in her own idea mm-hmm. about you know, keeping this hair, mm-hmm. and so even when her mom says it, yeah. she still believes mm-hmm. in this idea, and she says, you know, one more day, and
yeah.
they wait one more
mm-hmm.
day.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. I think that would help, you know, guide the kids towards that moral of the story instead of, well, I mean, just asking those questions to like I keep saying, plant the seed, get that in their mind, you know, start to thinking about, oh, well, she's believing in herself and stuff. And I think more targeted questions like that. So I think that'd be helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that then it's going to just be easier for them to identify. Now, it's a tough balance because it's like, I think if you do that, you're going to be closer to supplying the moral exactly. to them, yeah. and I think probably that was a hesitation in mm-hmm. like going in that direction. But I think that reflecting on the fact that they had trouble identifying the moral, and reflecting on the fact that it's so difficult for them, I think it probably makes sense to like lead them there a little bit more.
Yeah, provide a little bit more scaffolding.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there was only. Yeah, I can't remember exactly how many people really actually understood exactly what the moral was, but I think like in hindsight I would have provided more scaffolding and more questions leading towards that moral of the story.
Good. So that's kind of the big takeaway that I would focus on there is, you know, aligning the CFUs to the lesson and really like hitting that theme really hard. Mm-hmm. So every time the example comes up, you know, look at this, like look how Dahlia is like believing in her own ideas, even though this woman wants to cut off her hair or whatever, really like hitting that hard.
Yeah.
So.
And like I think like with last year the way we co-taught was separated OL and BL, and like if I had taken the BL group for the read aloud, I probably would have provided, you know, more scaffolding, but like you said, I don't want to feed them